Well, people go to great lengths to protect their computer information, creating passwords with letters, numbers, even all kinds of unusual characters. And they're changing their passwords regularly.
But now the man who wrote the 2003 book on password management is walking back and clarifying some of the safety recommendations. Joining us now, that very man, the one behind the tricky password rules, Bill Burr. He's a former manager at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Bill, it's been a long time since 2003. 14 years have gone by. Take us back in time, if you will. What was going into your decision-making then onto what passwords would require?
Well, what was going into my decision-making was simply what we knew about passwords at the time, and
which was what?
And sort of a lot of sort of traditional lore. Well, basically, you know, there's a notion that if we can tell exactly how hard it is to guess a password if it's completely random. And that's just a function of the length of it and the number of characters in the password, or in the alphabet you use for the password. But we didn't have really a lot of what I would call good sets of passwords that people actually chose or used in cases that mattered. There were some existing files of passwords that were sort of in the public domain that people knew to guess, to really know how hard it was to guess passwords very well. There's been a lot of research since then. We know a lot more about it now, and we know a lot more about how people behave, I think, under the pressure of the password policies that were not novel at the time, but were kind of codified in this 863 document that I wrote the password part of.
So, Bill, all those years that I followed your advice, here's my death stare to you. Do you think you really blew it when it came to password recommendations, though?
I don't know if I totally blew it, but I could have done better, surely.
And what have you learned now? I guess, what would you say now should be the key to those passwords in the simplest terms?
Well, you know, first of all, you have to manage your passwords somehow. And most of us, or many of us, have way more passwords than we can remember. And there's various systems for doing that. Many people, I think most people probably have throwaway passwords that they use on things that they just don't care about.
Right.
And then you need some better passwords. And you do need to change them occasionally, but you probably don't need to change them every 90 days. And there have been people particularly at Microsoft Research have done pretty good job of looking at the passwords that people use and how they respond and the incentives that they have. And I think the conclusion is that it's not too hard to make a password that resists hacking online or in band. That is, by somebody also logged into a computer trying to try passwords. You can simply throttle the rate at which they can try them and to guess your passwords. And 863, probably more than anything, the stuff that I wrote, took that as the model of its attack. But what turns out to be really deadly attacks are attacks where people steal an entire file of passwords from a server and then attack them offline.
So Bill, at the simplest way you can explain it, what should people do for a password now? What is the safest password creation now?
Well, the state of password creation is if you've got something really important, and you have to really think about what you're using the password for. But if you've got something really important, you should use a totally random password. There are various software things you can get and hardware things that I use a program called Password Safe. It's an old program, which will generate entirely random passwords for you. And then you come up with a password that you really can remember that's pretty long and fairly complex. and not easily guessed, and you use that password to protect the passwords that you're using. And secondly, you don't rely entirely on passwords. You use other things like to get multi-factor authentication if it's really important. If it's not so important, you don't have to sweat it so much. And but you don't need extremely long passwords unless it's really important.
So, Bill, if there was one piece of advice, Bill, that you could give everyone on passwords, what would it be?
Wow. Be organized about it, have a system, and probably use a password manager of some kind.
Why do you think it is, Bill, in the year 2017, we're still using passwords to get into emails, and there isn't some more advanced system?
Well, there are more advanced systems, a number of them, but basically, passwords give you something. They give you evidence that you're present. If I have, for example, in my pocket a cryptographic device that has a cryptographic key in it that is pretty much unbreakable in some sense, but anybody can steal that from me and then they have it. Okay, so I can prove possession of that key. So the password is something that you can't easily steal from me.
I don't know, Bill. I'm still waiting for the moment where you just use my retina to get into my email. I think it's time, Bill. It's time for that.
Line of security.
There's a good case to be made for that. The triad of authentication is something you are, something you have, and something you know. The problem with using your retina is, first of all, people can get photographs of your retina and often fool these things.
I didn't know that. Bill Burr, we want to thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you giving us insight into passwords. Thank you, sir.